Well, hello, friends. Tuesday, January 2nd, I am here as promised. And I get a question from Anne, and I wanted to answer it. But before I answer this fabulous question, I really wanted to talk about something that came up in my last live, which was on Facebook. So I thought I'd share it here as well. And the the topic that we were talking about is this idea of 70-20-10. If you're not familiar with 70-20-10, just Google it. But basically, the short of it is that what happens is that this is obviously a theory. It's not like it's carved in stone, but there's been some analysis done on how people learn, where people learn, especially as adults in a workplace environment. And the breakdown, this ratio, is that 70-20-10 is that 10% of your learning actually comes from these formal learning experiences, 20% comes from like self-study and self-work, and 70% of the learning that you do is on the job with a coach, with a mentor, or as through experience. And so one of the things I think that's happened, and I think we have to look at it upside down and differently, is that yes, definitely. If 70% of the learning that you do happens in the actual job environment, then we should facilitate some sort of basically a support in place, like coaching, like mentorship, like job buddies, which I've seen done, and actually I think that works really well. Being assigned a buddy, an experienced buddy. And those things should be set up because that's where a lot of the training or the learning happens, right? So you want to structure that so the learning that happens is actually really good. Because one of the things you don't want happening is for a new person to pick up bad habits, which is very easy because I find sometimes the people who gravitate towards the noobs are people who shouldn't be mentoring them. So you definitely want to be in charge of picking who that should be, somebody who's exemplary, right? If you have that luxury. If you don't, then you should design scenarios that help show people how to deal with really common situations. But that's another story. You are here probably because you love scenarios already, so nothing that I say will necessarily surprise you, but this might. So in that model, the 10%, right, the 10% ratio is formal instruction. And one of the things that I've seen happen is that people say, oh, well, only 10% of the learning happens in formal instruction, so we shouldn't really care about it as much. We should just kind of let it fall. And all the focus is now on how do we set up mentoring, coaching, and on-the-job instructional systems. No. The 10% now, because it is only 10%, now it's on us to make that the most foundational, awesome, engaging, inspiring experience ever. If you don't have the foundation, there's no way that your conversations with your peers, conversations with your mentor will be as effective or give you as much value as if a person who actually has that foundation. And I say this because sometimes, like when you're a part of a mastermind or something, or a Q&A group for a course, and you can quickly see the people who have not gone through the actual foundational material to understand the course, because the questions that they're asking during the Q&A are completely ridiculous. And if the instructor is really good, they'll say, you know what, that's foundational, go back. Because when you have already a really strong foundation, during those Q&A sessions, you know what to ask, and you are actually asking things that are to the next level, which is wonderful. I'm not saying that everybody in the Q&A session should be necessarily an expert on all the content, but I'm saying that you get a whole lot more value when you join those groups, because then all of a sudden people are all at the same baseline. They're now taking things to the next level. So that's one of the things that I always say, is that it's not really that if something is 10%, that it doesn't matter anymore. In fact, that matters even more, because if we know now that only 10% of that training comes, or formal instruction contributes to the rest of that person's learning, you want to make that the best 10% ever, right? You want to make it as powerful, as punchy, like I said, as aha inducing, so that when they go out, they're like, whoa, okay, I've just had some like major ahas, and I don't, I know I have to do some of that follow up on my own, hence the 20%, which is where you're like doing your own learning and investigation. But that 10% is almost, to me, this impetus to make all of the rest of it, the baseline, to make all of the rest of that learning and interacting with a coach actually possible. So one of the things that I found, which was pretty awesome, is, I don't know if you guys listen to Jim Rohn, but he's amazing. Like if you get Audible and get one of his, audio cassette recordings on Audible, fabulous speaker, just to listen to him, how he's became a master of his craft. But one of the things he said is, when you come to somebody for help, and they've already seen that you've not only tried to formulate the problem on your own in your mind, and you've done some research and you've done some reading, there's a level of respect now that comes. And that person now appreciates the fact that you're not just going, I don't know, can you help me? They've actually done some of their own work, and they're saying, listen, I've tried all of these things, and now I'm looking for your perspective. I'm now looking for your advice because I wasn't able to solve it on my own. So that is what the position you want to put your learner in, that they've already done a lot of thinking on their own. They've done research. They have identified some of their gaps. And now when they go to the next level to this mentor, it's not exhausting, because they're not going, okay, well, I guess I have to explain everything to you because you've never taken the time to actually get the foundation. Now, this person is helping them, like an effective coach, make small tweaks and small adjustments, so that person is basically making leaps and bounds, because now they have the advantage of this mentor. That's where you want people to be, because everything else is just babysitting, right? So if you can get people to, with your 10%, to get people excited to do the 20% of their learning, then the next level, that 70%, is like small adjustments to get to mastery, which is awesome, which is effective, which is efficient. So that's what I suggest. Now, let's get to the question at hand, which is, how can we make scenarios for complicated life-altering systems? The usual method is a week of fire hose classes. When we say fire hose, basically what that means is, have you ever tried to drink from a fire hose? Now, obviously it would probably not be possible, and I think it would actually take your face off, from what I understand, because of the pressure. But basically that's what it is you like, there's just too much, right? And I think that one of the things that we can do, there's two things that we can do. One, make sure that the language is in the training is fabulous, because to me, even if you can add a lot of sexy scenarios and they're really contextual, if the supporting material in those classes is terrible legalese and hard to understand, no matter how much you inspire somebody with a scenario to go and learn on their own, they're like, whoa, this scenario showed me that I really have some serious gaps and I don't necessarily understand, what's going on. Maybe I should look for some additional info. Oh, look, they've provided me with a manual. And the manual's opened and you're like, wow, I really don't get this. And this is terribly written, and probably a bunch of things that have been compiled from a bunch of photocopies, and it's not very readable. So my number one strategy is, whenever I'm working with somebody to even just implement scenarios, is let me look at what you're leading them to. And what you're leading your learners to should be just as awesome as that scenario you designed. And when I say just as awesome, I mean clear, good language, understandable, and especially if you're training people to be effective on the job, there should be pieces in there where they should be able to pull it out and be like, okay, yeah, look, here's a quick guide and I know when to use it and it's going to help me do this. Okay, cool. I can take that with me, because you can't have a giant binder and say, all right, now just go away with your giant Bible and hopefully all of it will make sense when you get to the job. So what you're trying to do is, with the scenario, it's kind of like if I drew the map of the ecosystem. The scenario could be shown to people before to show them the gaps, and it's there to get them excited. They're like, whoa, look, I don't know this, and miraculously it's going to be offered in this training. Yes, I'm excited about that. I can't wait to learn because I hate not knowing stuff, right? Show up to the training. Training is awesome, but the training also not only does it tie into the scenario and it facilitates that, but it also says, and here's all the stuff that we're going to help you use while you're at work. And then potentially the scenario can also be then, I know I'm going off screen here, so I'm sorry if there's not a continuation that's happening for you. But basically what happens is now the scenario can also be deployed after the training to the same people to reinforce some of those, ideas that they were maybe not so confident about, or also for them to explore alternatives to see, now, when I first took that scenario, this is what I chose because I thought that was the right answer. Now I'm going to choose this one just to see what happens, because I didn't really explore that during the training, or that I don't remember what we said about that. That's why it's so important when you're drafting scenarios that every single one of those options, like a scenario structure, right, where you've got a situation and quite a bit of setup, and a situation where you have to make a decision. And all the options that are presented to the learner are lessons, even if they're the wrong thing to pick. So that's why it's super important to make those really contextual, because if you want to reuse that and at a later date, each one of those will still serve as a lesson. So that person might now think a different one is the right answer, but it's not, because it's a common mistake that people who are, let's say, on the job 2 months make. It still serves its purpose. So you want to do that right the first time. And when I say right the first time, I don't mean that it's going to be perfect the first time. I just mean that after a couple of iterations with some end users, you gather some feedback, and then you make it awesome. And then that is a tool you can use not only pre-training as a pre-test, post-training as a post-test, but also after training, like 2 or 3 months, to see if people are still needing the reinforcement and learning from it. And maybe you were also, how I said, if you have a week's worth of training, there's no way you can build scenarios for all of it. I mean, you could, but then what's the point of the whole week training, right? You might as well just give it all to them in scenarios, and they can learn on their own, and then bring them in for, Q&A sessions. But if you have this training, that's 4 days, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, how can I in any way augment this training with some meaningful scenarios? Well, don't do it all. I'm sure if you get the subject matter expert in the room and I said, okay, on your hand, give me 3 things that are crucial, that if they do, these are the mistakes that if they make them, basically gets them to quit, because the consequences can be so dire. Guess what? Those are going to be now your 3 scenarios that you start with, because the idea for a scenario most times is to awaken people's gaps. And so if you can get them to work through some consequences, they're amped up, and then those gaps are kind of made evident to them, that training now becomes a lot more interesting, because they're going to be waiting to see where the information comes up, where they can prove either they were right or wrong. A lot of people just actually, when you pose a question, not only do they love the fact that you're asking them a question because they want to answer it, the second thing is they want to know if they're right. So if you can give them the opportunity to not only perceive their gap, figure out there's something wrong, now offer a really awesome workshop that solves that, and then also during the workshop, discuss the consequences. There may be more than one ways to solve this particular situation, which is great, which is wonderful, because then people are thinking about it, connecting it to what they already know and then applying it in the context of their job. That's awesome. So do that. So so just to recap, my advice there to Anne, who sent in this question, is if you have a complicated situation for scenarios, do not try to make all of it into a scenario. Just pick 1 or 2 skills that you really want to drive home, that are going to be the most valuable to you, or that most people, when they come to the training, usually they have these gaps. Focus on that. Even if somebody doesn't have those gaps, that's fine. Now they're really aware of the of this actual consequences. And also when they come to your session, they're like, you know, in the scenario you did that. Well, I'm really good on that. I'm really happy with that aspect and I'm really comfortable with it. I have all that experience. What I'm actually missing is this. So it just gives you a better diagnostic. And like I said, the other thing is if you're designing a wicked scenario, and most scenarios are pretty awesome because they're actually the opposite of what most people get, which is just a giant manual. We're actually asking people to make decisions, and that's exciting. That's way more exciting than having to just read something and then regurgitate it, right? So hope you agree. So then what happens is you want to make sure that regardless of how awesome your scenario is, it is also backed up with some awesome training resources or info. And that to me is not stuff that's like sexy looking or works on mobile, although those are things that are bonuses. Is it clearly written? And is it nicely written in a way that I can actually as a learner go, oh yeah, that's where I'd use that. Yeah, well, you know, when I'm struggling with this at work, I'll pull out this. So whatever your scenario is selling, really, because it is all propaganda. Come on, we're trying to help somebody think a different way or learn something new, persuade them, right? So we're trying to persuade them to do something. Let's hope that when they get to that piece where you've been trying to persuade them to get to, it's also awesome and it serves their need. Because otherwise they'll be like, oh, well, I got all excited and look, you have nothing to offer me. So the other thing I want you to think about is if you're offering something to people like a support resource, a lot of people like, and these are the projects I've worked on. You come to a company and they're like, yeah, we have this repository of about 1,500 courses. They all need to be updated because they don't, you know, we got new branding or the buttons are ugly or all this. No. If something ever breaks at your house and you need to have the answer to how to fix it, you don't care if the YouTube video was shot 10 years ago or last week, or the, you know, even the gradient of that video. What you care about is it helpful? Does it have context? Does it solve my problem? So that's really what your training is there to support. So all that people need is the context of why they should be accessing that specific tool or that specific resource. What it looks like, how it functions is secondary. If the basics are there, you've got enough. So what you really need to focus on is not necessarily the repository, but use the scenario as this prism to shine a light on, you guys, I know that you didn't know, but we have this awesome resource to help you just in time. Here it is. And the scenario helped them see that basically it's a spotlight on that resource. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. Now, I see there's people in here, and if you have questions, bye, Joe. Thanks for visiting. If you have questions, please post them here. I don't mind. Also, see, I'm running these lives, and I'm thinking that there might be better times to run them, just to make sure that people are, you know, like actually tuning in when they're able. So if you want to tell me in the comments or post underneath the video where you're at when you're watching, I might be able to like just jump around and maybe schedule them at different times of the day. So we're actually talking to people when they're actually able to talk to me during the lives. And because I think part of this is like, would be cool to say, okay, Anna, I'm really not getting that. Can you, give me more details, give me more examples. So I hope this was useful and helpful, and thanks so much for stopping by. And like I said, if you need any help with scenario design, just email me, Anna@AnnaSabramowitz, or better yet, post your question in the comments. And then what I can do is I'll probably address it. And I run one of these every day, Monday to Friday. I haven't committed to weekends yet. But if you have any questions or any projects that you're working on that you need help with, if I can actually answer it, I will do it in the next live. So hope to see you at the next one. And thanks for visiting, my friend. Have a great rest of the day. Okay.